The evening rush had just begun, and the restaurant was glowing with warm yellow lights that reflected off the crystal glasses and polished cutlery. The sound of chatter mixed with clinking plates filled the air, giving the place its usual sense of elegance. In the middle of all this, a young waitress hurried from table to table, her steps light but careful. She tried her best to stay invisible, not because she wanted to, but because that was how she survived her long shifts. She moved quietly, smiled when needed, and took every order with patience even when people barely looked at her face. Her uniform was simple and neat, though a bit worn at the edges. A small name tag pinned to her chest carried her name, though few ever read it. Most guests saw only a servant, someone meant to pour wine, serve food, and clean their messes. But behind that quiet face was a story no one there knew. She had once dreamed of sitting at a piano on a real stage, not serving tables. There had been a time when music was her world, when her fingers moved over the keys like they were part of her heartbeat. But life, as it often does, had other plans. That night, the restaurant was busier than usual because a group of wealthy guests had reserved the long table near the piano. They were well-dressed, loud, and full of themselves. They were known for spending big and tipping little. The staff dreaded their visits, but the manager welcomed them with the brightest smile he could fake. Money had that effect on people. As the young waitress approached their table, she could already hear them laughing. One of the men waved his hand impatiently for another bottle of wine. She nodded and quickly brought it over, setting it down gently. But in that moment, one of the women turned to talk to someone beside her, and the man's arm brushed the bottle just as she poured. A few drops splashed onto the edge of his sleeve. The laughter stopped. The man looked down at his sleeve, then up at her with a sharp glare. "Are you serious?" he said loudly, loud enough for the other tables to hear. The restaurant quieted slightly as a few heads turned their way. The waitress stammered an apology, reaching for a napkin, but he pushed her hand away. "Don't touch me," he snapped. The others at the table laughed again, but this time their laughter carried an edge of mockery. One woman chuckled and said, "Maybe she should perform for us instead, make up for the accident." "There's a piano right there," the man smirked. "That's not a bad idea," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Tell you what, if you want me to forget this little mistake, why don't you give us a show? Play something. Make it worth our time." The waitress froze. The piano stood in the corner near the bar, a beautiful old thing polished to shine, though no one ever played it anymore. It was mostly for decoration, a touch of class, as the manager liked to say. She glanced toward her boss, silently hoping he would step in, but he avoided her eyes. "Go on," the man urged. "Show us what you can do. We could use some entertainment." The waitress could feel everyone watching. Her face flushed hot with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor. But when the manager walked over, instead of stopping it, he placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Just do it, please. Don't make a scene." She couldn't believe it. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she thought she might cry, but she swallowed it down. She took a deep breath and nodded weakly. The table of guests laughed again, pleased with themselves. One of them raised a glass and said, "Let's see if the waitress knows any real music." Slowly, she walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy. She could hear the whispers of other diners following her. The whole restaurant had gone unusually quiet, as if waiting for something awkward to happen. Some of the guests wore pitying looks, others just curiosity. She pulled out the bench and sat down, her hands resting in her lap. For a few seconds, she just stared at the keys. They gleamed under the dim lights like tiny pieces of memory. It had been years since she had touched a piano. The last time was before her father passed away, back when she still practiced every morning before school. He had believed in her even when they had almost nothing. He used to say that her music could make people feel things they couldn't put into words. But after he was gone, everything changed. Bills piled up. Her mother grew sick. Lessons stopped. Dreams faded. And now, here she was, a waitress being forced to play in front of strangers who saw her as nothing more than entertainment. Her hands trembled as she lifted them toward the keys. The first touch was hesitant, almost fearful. The guests at the table whispered and giggled. One of them said, "Come on, let's not wait all night." Another muttered, "She probably doesn't even know how." But then something stirred inside her, something old and buried deep. She took another slow breath and closed her eyes. When she pressed the first few notes, the sound came out soft, uncertain. The laughter at the table grew louder, but she ignored it. She kept playing, letting her fingers remember what her heart never forgot. The melody began to take shape, a tune she used to play for her father, one that always made him smile. Her fingers started moving faster, more confidently. The sound grew stronger, flowing through the room like a breeze. The guests who had been laughing went quiet. The music spread, delicate but powerful, reaching every corner of the restaurant. People began to turn their heads. The waiters stopped for a moment, listening. The kitchen doors swung open slightly, and even the chefs peeked out. The once noisy restaurant became silent except for the piano. Her fingers moved gracefully as if they had been waiting years for this moment. The tune carried both sadness and strength, a story told without words. As she played, memories flashed through her mind. Her father's smile, the small apartment filled with music, the day she packed away her sheet notes for the last time. Each note she played was a piece of that story, and for the first time in a long while she didn't feel like a waitress. She felt like herself again. When the final note faded, there was silence, a deep, almost fragile silence. Then came the sound of hands clapping. It started softly from one table, then another, until the entire restaurant was applauding. The guests who had humiliated her looked stunned. The man who had mocked her earlier just sat there, his mouth slightly open. The woman beside him looked down, embarrassed. The waitress stood slowly, her eyes still glistening with emotion. She didn't bow or say anything. She simply walked away from the piano, her steps light and calm now. As she passed the manager, he looked at her differently, a mix of guilt and admiration. She didn't need his approval anymore. When she returned to the kitchen, the other staff members smiled at her. One of the cooks whispered, "That was incredible." She gave a small, shy smile but said nothing. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear this time, but from release. Out in the dining area, the guests were still talking about her performance. Some called it magical, others unbelievable. But for her, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about remembering who she was, the girl who once believed in music, who still carried it quietly inside her all along. That night, after the restaurant closed, she sat alone by the piano for a while. The lights were dim, the air still. She ran her fingers over the keys one last time, gently, almost like saying goodbye to an old friend. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years she felt a spark of hope. The world might have made her hide her gift, but it hadn't taken it away. Not really. And somewhere deep inside she knew this moment, the night they tried to shame her, was just the beginning of something new. After that unforgettable night, life at the restaurant seemed both the same and different for the young waitress. The busy shifts, the pouring of drinks and the serving of dishes continued as usual, yet something inside her had shifted. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that had been missing for years. Her fingers itched to touch the piano again, and she found herself glancing toward it whenever she had a moment. That night's performance had reminded her of who she really was, the person who had once believed that music could speak the words the heart could not. The days after were filled with small but noticeable changes. Some customers who had been regulars began to treat her with more respect, occasionally complimenting her work or asking politely about her day. It was subtle, but it mattered. Even the other waiters and kitchen staff looked at her differently. They whispered among themselves, telling one another how she had turned a moment of humiliation into something extraordinary. It wasn't just about the applause. It was about the way she had reclaimed her dignity in front of everyone. Despite the newfound respect, she still carried a quiet sadness. Memories of her father and the life she could have had weighed heavily on her. Some nights she would go home and sit at the small keyboard she had tucked into the corner of her apartment, fingers moving over the keys softly, trying to bring back the same magic she had shown at the restaurant. But the sound never felt quite the same as the grand piano in the restaurant, the one that had witnessed her triumph. Still, she practiced diligently, reminding herself that she could still create beauty if she allowed herself the chance. One evening, during a quiet moment between busy tables, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. A man had come in with a folder under his arm, quietly speaking with the manager. She caught a few words, something about music and talent. Curiosity pricked at her heart. Who was he? Why was he talking about music in the restaurant? She tried to return to her work without drawing attention, but her mind kept drifting toward the piano. As the night progressed, the man moved toward the piano, watching her from a distance while she carried trays and took orders. She tried to ignore him, but the feeling of being observed was unusual. It was not the usual judgmental stare of wealthy diners, or the impatient looks from customers wanting to be served quickly. This was different. It was quiet, measured, and full of interest. Her heart skipped a beat, and a nervous excitement mixed with fear ran through her. After her shift, the manager approached her cautiously. "He wants to speak to you," he said, his tone hesitant. "He says he was impressed with your performance the other night." She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Speak to me?" she repeated softly. The manager nodded. "He says he is a music producer and would like to talk about helping you get back into playing professionally." Her chest tightened with disbelief. She had never imagined that the night meant to humiliate her could lead to something like this. The thought of someone taking her seriously, recognizing her talent, filled her with a mixture of joy and fear. Could she trust this opportunity? Could she believe that her years of hidden practice and quiet dedication could actually matter to someone outside her small world? The next evening, after her shift ended, she returned to the restaurant for a private meeting with the man. He introduced himself with a warm smile and an easy manner that immediately put her at ease. He explained that he had been visiting the restaurant for other reasons when her piano performance caught his attention. He said he had never expected to hear such talent in such an unlikely place and that he saw potential in her that could be shared with a wider audience. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The reality of what he was saying seemed too big to grasp. She had been playing quietly for herself, afraid to show the world her gift. And now, here was someone offering a chance she had never imagined, someone who believed in her even when she had almost stopped believing herself. "I understand this is sudden," he said gently, "and maybe it feels overwhelming, but I want to help you find a way to play music that reaches people, to give your talent the chance it deserves." She nodded slowly, emotions swirling inside her. It wasn't just excitement. It was relief, hope, and fear all at once. The years of doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a life that had little room for her dreams, suddenly felt a little lighter. Over the next few weeks, she began meeting with the producer after her shifts. They started with small steps, discussing her goals, selecting pieces that could highlight her strengths, and even revisiting the basics she had learned so long ago. Each meeting was a mix of instruction and encouragement. She remembered how it felt to be guided by someone who truly understood her passion for music, and the memory of her father's pride seemed to return with every note she played. At home, she practiced diligently, her tiny apartment filled with the soft hum of the keyboard. Every evening, the music seemed to heal a little piece of her. She started to dream again, imagining herself playing in larger spaces, with people who truly listened, people who understood the language of her music. Back at the restaurant, the regular customers and staff noticed a change. Her confidence was no longer quiet and hidden. It had a presence that made her impossible to ignore. When she walked past the piano during shifts, she would sometimes pause, letting her fingers hover over the keys, imagining the songs she might play someday. The restaurant that had once felt like a cage now felt like a stage waiting for her next performance. The wealthy guests who had mocked her still came occasionally, but their attitude had shifted. Some avoided her gaze, unsure how to respond to the young woman who had once been humiliated in front of them, and had now become someone to be watched and admired. The staff no longer whispered about her out of sympathy. They spoke with genuine respect and a hint of awe. One evening, during a particularly slow shift, she found herself sitting at the piano for a few moments. Her hands moved over the keys almost instinctively, producing a melody that seemed to flow from deep within her. The music carried a quiet strength, a story of perseverance and hidden beauty. As she played, she realized that she was no longer performing for approval or to avoid humiliation. She was playing for herself, for the love of music that had never left her. The producer continued to encourage her, gradually introducing more challenging pieces and helping her develop her own style. He often reminded her that talent alone was not enough. The emotion and authenticity she put into her music was what made it resonate with others. She began to understand that her past struggles, her moments of fear and doubt, had shaped her music in ways that no formal training ever could. Her evenings became a rhythm of work, practice, and quiet reflection. She learned to balance her responsibilities at the restaurant with her growing commitment to music. Each day brought small victories, A passage played flawlessly, a new technique mastered, a memory of her father's encouragement rekindled. Slowly, she felt herself becoming not just a waitress, but a musician reclaiming the life she had once dreamed of. One night, after a particularly moving practice session, she sat back and looked at the piano. The polished wood reflected her tired but determined face. She thought about the night that had started it all, the moment of humiliation that had somehow led to this opportunity. A soft smile crossed her lips. It was strange how life worked. Sometimes the hardest, most painful moments became the very catalysts for change. As the weeks turned into months, she began to notice other subtle changes in herself. Her posture improved, her steps were lighter, and her eyes held a spark that had been missing. The piano became a friend, a place where she could express everything she had kept hidden for years. And though the restaurant still demanded her attention, it no longer felt like a cage. It was a place of connection, where her talent could quietly shine while she waited for the bigger stages ahead. Through it all, she never forgot the lessons of that first night. Humiliation had taught her resilience, and the courage to face fear had awakened her talent. She realized that even in a world that often overlooked her, she could create moments of beauty and meaning. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge to her past, a path to her future, and a reminder that dreams, even delayed, could still be fulfilled. By the end of the second part of her journey, she was no longer just the quiet waitress carrying trays and answering questions. She was a young woman rediscovering her gift, reclaiming her voice through music and preparing for the life she had once thought impossible. And though challenges and doubts still lingered, she knew that she had taken the first true steps toward a future filled with possibility, hope, and the sound of her own music echoing in the world. Months passed, and the young waitress began to feel a sense of purpose she had never known before. Each evening, after completing her long shifts at the restaurant, she would stay behind to practice on the piano. She had developed a routine that balanced her responsibilities with her music, and each day brought small improvements that built her confidence. The initial fear of performing in public had faded, replaced by a quiet determination to explore her talent fully. Word of her piano performances had started to spread quietly among the regulars of the restaurant. Some who had once mocked her now watched with interest from across the room, while others came specifically to see her play. The staff began noticing the change in her demeanor. She walked taller, smiled more genuinely, and her movements were more assured. She was no longer just someone serving food and drinks. She was a presence, someone who commanded quiet attention without demanding it. One evening, a small group of people gathered near the piano, intrigued by the soft music drifting from the corner. They were a mix of customers and a few restaurant staff who had stopped what they were doing to listen. Her hands moved over the keys effortlessly, producing melodies that were both gentle and powerful, full of emotion and story. Each note seemed to speak from her heart, telling of dreams once paused, of struggles endured, and of hope quietly rekindled. The producer who had discovered her talent continued to guide her after her shifts, suggesting new pieces and helping her refine her technique. He encouraged her to experiment, to express herself fully through music, and to trust in the story she could tell with her piano. Through these lessons, she learned not just to play notes but to communicate emotion, to make each song a reflection of her experiences. It was an awakening of her spirit, and with each session, she felt closer to the person she had once dreamed of becoming. At home, her small apartment was filled with the sound of piano music, often late into the night. Neighbors passing by might hear the soft, flowing melodies through the walls, though few understood the significance of the music. To her, each note was a step back into a world she had abandoned, a world where she felt alive and capable. Even when she felt tired or discouraged, the piano provided solace, a quiet reminder of the path she had chosen and the talent she refused to let go. The restaurant remained a constant backdrop to her journey. Busy nights continued, with trays carried swiftly and orders taken with precision, but her mind often wandered to the piano during these moments. She would think about the music she wanted to play, the songs she wanted to learn, and the feelings she wanted to share. Each glance at the piano brought a mix of excitement and anticipation, reminding her of the potential that lay just beyond her fingertips. One particularly quiet evening, a small child sitting with his parents stopped what he was doing to watch her play. His wide eyes reflected awe and curiosity. She noticed him and smiled gently, encouraged by the pure, unspoken admiration in his gaze. It was a small moment, but it reminded her of why she loved music, the ability to touch people in ways words never could. That single connection, brief as it was, gave her energy and renewed purpose. Her reputation continued to grow quietly. Regular customers began asking her about her music, inquiring if she had ever performed outside the restaurant. They wanted to know her story, her journey, and she found herself sharing bits and pieces, carefully choosing what to reveal. Through these conversations, she realized that her music could inspire others, not just entertain them. The impact of her talent extended beyond applause. It reached hearts. One night, after an especially moving performance, she received an unexpected compliment from a guest she had never met before. He had been a musician himself, visiting the restaurant on business, and he had been captivated by the depth of feeling in her music. He spoke of how rare it was to find someone who played with such emotion and technical skill. His words left her both humbled and encouraged. She began to see herself not just as a waitress who played piano, but as a musician in her own right, deserving of recognition and opportunity. Meanwhile, the producer began arranging more formal opportunities for her to perform. He suggested small gatherings, private sessions, and eventually larger events where her talent could be showcased. Each new step was carefully planned to ensure she felt comfortable and supported. She was hesitant at first, unsure if she could handle performing beyond the familiar walls of the restaurant, but the encouragement of someone who believed in her helped her take those steps forward. Through it all, she learned to balance her life. The restaurant provided a steady income and a place to connect with people, while the piano allowed her to explore her passion and grow her talent. It was not an easy balance. There were moments of exhaustion and doubt, times when she questioned whether she could continue. But each time she sat at the piano, the music reminded her of why she had started, and the resolve to keep moving forward returned stronger than before. The staff at the restaurant continued to watch her with admiration. They noticed the subtle confidence in her movements, the calm assurance in her interactions, and the joy that seemed to radiate when she played. Even the manager, who had once been hesitant to support her, now encouraged her efforts and protected her time for practice whenever possible. The restaurant, once just a place of work, had become a space where her talent could grow and be appreciated. Her personal life also began to shift. Friends and acquaintances started noticing the changes in her demeanor and energy. She carried herself with a newfound grace and confidence, speaking more freely about her aspirations and dreams. Though she remained humble, there was a quiet pride in knowing that her dedication and resilience were opening doors she had never imagined. The piano became more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a mirror reflecting her growth. Each session revealed new aspects of her skill and creativity, and she found joy in experimenting with different styles and pieces. Sometimes she would compose her own melodies, drawing inspiration from her life experiences and the people she encountered daily. The act of creation became a source of empowerment, reinforcing her belief in her abilities. One evening, after a particularly intense practice session, she sat back and reflected on her journey. The memory of being forced to play in front of a mocking audience still lingered, but it no longer carried the sting of shame. Instead, it had become a catalyst, the moment that had propelled her toward rediscovering her passion and embracing her potential. She realized that the hardships she had endured had shaped her resilience and deepened her connection to music. As the months continued, she began to envision the future more clearly. She dreamed of performing in larger venues, sharing her music with broader audiences and inspiring others who might feel trapped by circumstances or fear. The idea of giving back, of helping those who struggled to pursue their passions, grew stronger in her mind. She knew that her journey was not just about personal achievement, but about using her experiences and talent to touch the lives of others. Her growth was gradual but steady. Each evening at the piano, each interaction with the producer, and each performance in the restaurant contributed to her evolving sense of self. She learned to trust her instincts, embrace her emotions, and take ownership of her journey. The young waitress who had once hidden in the background was now a woman discovering the full extent of her abilities and the impact she could have through music. Through this process, she also learned patience and humility. She understood that mastery required time, effort, and persistence. Mistakes were not failures, but opportunities to learn and improve. The discipline of regular practice, combined with the encouragement and guidance she received, allowed her to grow steadily and confidently. Each small victory reinforced her belief in herself and her music. The restaurant continued to be a place of inspiration. Every time she returned to the piano during her shifts, she felt a sense of connection to her journey and to the people around her. The audience, whether familiar or new, became part of the experience, responding to the emotions conveyed through her music. It was a symbiotic relationship where her talent enriched their experience, and their attention and appreciation fueled her passion. By the end of this period, she had transformed in ways that were visible and profound. She was no longer merely a waitress. She was an emerging musician, confident in her abilities and ready to explore new opportunities. Her journey was far from complete, but the foundation she had built through perseverance, courage, and dedication gave her the strength to face future challenges. She had discovered that true talent was not just about skill, but about resilience, heart, and the willingness to rise above adversity. And so, the young woman continued, her hands moving gracefully over the piano keys, her heart filled with music, and her spirit buoyed by the knowledge that she had reclaimed a part of herself that had been lost for too long. Each note was a step forward, each melody a testament to her journey, and each performance a promise of the bright future that lay ahead. The restaurant had grown accustomed to her quiet moments at the piano, but one evening felt different. The soft melody that usually accompanied dinner service was replaced by a deeper, more confident performance. Her hands glided over the keys with precision and emotion, and the music seemed to fill every corner of the room. Even the most distracted diners paused to listen, drawn in by the beauty and honesty of her playing. That night, a new visitor arrived at the restaurant. He was a quiet man, not wealthy like the usual patrons, but his eyes held a spark of curiosity and appreciation. He had heard about the pianist from friends who frequented the restaurant and wanted to experience it for himself. He watched from a distance, his gaze focused entirely on her, noting the emotion in each note, the way her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, and the way her body seemed to flow with the music. As the night progressed, she lost herself in the music. Every piece she played seemed to tell a story, of lost dreams, of perseverance, of hope that refused to fade. The memory of the night she had been forced to play in front of mocking guests was still vivid, but it no longer held shame. Instead, it had become a memory of transformation, the night she had reclaimed her power through her talent. The restaurant staff watched in admiration. They had seen her grow quietly over the past months, but her performance that evening was different. It was not just skill. It was presence. It was confidence wrapped in humility. A silent proclamation that she belonged to the music and the world it could touch. The manager, who had once been hesitant to support her, smiled with pride and a hint of awe. He had witnessed her evolution from a timid waitress to someone whose talent commanded attention. After her performance, the quiet man approached her. He introduced himself as a music teacher who ran a small community program for young musicians. He explained that he had been searching for someone with real talent and heart to help inspire the students he worked with. He spoke of how rare it was to find someone who could combine technical skill with genuine emotion, and he wanted to offer her an opportunity to teach and perform in the program. Her heart raced as she listened. The thought of sharing her music in a meaningful way beyond the restaurant was both exciting and terrifying. She had spent so many years hidden, practicing quietly and dreaming alone, that the idea of stepping into a role where others looked to her for guidance felt overwhelming. Yet deep down she knew it was an opportunity to make a difference and continue her journey. Over the following weeks, she began to split her time between the restaurant and the community music program. At first she felt unsure of herself, worried that she would not be able to connect with the students or meet their expectations. But as she began to teach, she realized that her experiences and challenges gave her a unique perspective. She could show them not just the notes on the page, but the passion, discipline, and heart needed to bring music to life. The students responded eagerly to her guidance. She shared stories of her journey, the struggles and triumphs, and the lessons she had learned about perseverance and belief in oneself. Her hands would move across the piano, demonstrating techniques while her words carried encouragement. The joy in their faces reminded her of the power of music, not just as performance but as a bridge between people, a way to inspire and connect. Meanwhile, the restaurant continued to support her growth. Her colleagues adjusted to her new schedule, offering help and encouragement. Regular customers who had once mocked or ignored her now watched with respect and admiration. The piano, once a symbol of her humiliation, had become a symbol of her resilience and achievement. One evening, during a particularly challenging performance at the music program, she encountered a moment of doubt. A young student struggled with a piece, and she saw a reflection of her own fears and uncertainties. She took a deep breath and guided the student patiently, reminding them that mistakes were part of learning, that perseverance and dedication mattered more than perfection. As the student finally played the piece successfully, the sense of pride and relief she felt mirrored her own journey. Back at the restaurant, her performances continued to evolve. She experimented with new melodies, incorporated different styles, and allowed herself to take risks. The audience, whether staff or diners, responded with genuine appreciation. The once quiet restaurant now buzzed with subtle energy whenever she played, the music creating an invisible thread that connected everyone in the room. As her confidence grew, so did her sense of purpose. She began to dream of future performances outside the familiar walls of the restaurant, imagining small concerts, community events, and even recording sessions. The thought of sharing her music with a wider audience filled her with excitement, though she remained grounded, knowing that each step required patience and dedication. The producer who had discovered her continued to offer guidance, suggesting opportunities for exposure, and helping her navigate the complexities of performing professionally. His encouragement was steady and thoughtful, reinforcing her belief in herself while providing practical advice. With each meeting, she felt more prepared, more capable, and more ready to embrace the next stage of her journey. Her personal life flourished alongside her musical growth. Friends and acquaintances noticed the changes in her demeanor, the quiet confidence in her interactions, and the sense of joy that radiated when she played. She had learned to balance her responsibilities with her passion, and the harmony between work and music brought her a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. The piano became her constant companion, a source of comfort, inspiration, and challenge. Each practice session revealed new insights, new ways to express emotion, and new possibilities for creativity. She explored different genres, composed original pieces, and experimented with improvisation. Music became a living, breathing part of her life, a reflection of her growth, resilience, and determination. One night, after a particularly moving performance at the restaurant, she sat alone by the piano, reflecting on her journey. The memory of the night she had been forced to play, the humiliation she had felt, and the transformation that followed all came rushing back. She realized that every experience, every challenge, had shaped her into the person she had become, someone who could face fear, embrace opportunity, and create beauty even in unlikely circumstances. She thought about the young students she taught, the diners who paused to listen, and the colleagues who had supported her along the way. Each connection reinforced the value of her journey and the importance of sharing her music with the world. She understood that her talent was not just for personal satisfaction. It was a gift meant to inspire, comfort, and connect with others. As she played softly that night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the challenges that had pushed her, for the people who had believed in her, and for the music that had always been her refuge. She felt a quiet joy. The piano, once a symbol of shame, had become a testament to her resilience and the power of following one's passion. Her journey was far from over, but she had taken significant steps toward realizing her potential. Each performance, each lesson, and each practice session brought her closer to the musician she had always dreamed of becoming. The young waitress who had once been overlooked and humiliated had transformed into a woman of strength, talent, and purpose, ready to embrace the opportunities that lay ahead. And so, she continued, her hands moving gracefully over the keys, her heart full of music and her spirit buoyed by the knowledge that she had reclaimed her voice, her dreams, and her life. The restaurant, the students, the music, all were part of her journey, each note a step forward, each melody a reflection of her courage and perseverance, and each performance a promise of the bright future still to come. The months that followed brought a new rhythm to the young woman's life. Between her shifts at the restaurant and her work with the community music program, she had little time for herself. but the busyness felt rewarding rather than exhausting. Each day was filled with small victories, perfectly executed pieces, students mastering difficult passages, and moments when a simple melody could bring a smile to someone's face. These were the moments that reminded her why she had persisted, why she had held on to music even when life seemed to demand she give it up. Her confidence in public performances had grown tremendously. What had once been terrifying now felt invigorating. She began to experiment with her repertoire, exploring pieces she had long admired but had never dared to play in front of an audience. Her fingers moved with the familiarity of old friends, guided by both technique and emotion. Each note carried a story, each melody a reflection of her experiences. She had become not just a performer but a storyteller, conveying feelings and memories through the language of music. One evening, the restaurant hosted a charity event that drew a larger crowd than usual. She was asked to perform, not as a sideshow or an entertainment gimmick, but as the main attraction. The thought of performing in front of a larger, more attentive audience filled her with both excitement and nervous energy. She took a deep breath as she sat at the piano, recalling the first time she had played under pressure, and she let herself focus on the music instead of the crowd. As her hands moved across the keys, the room grew silent. The music was flowing and expressive, each note resonating with clarity and emotion. Guests who had never seen her perform were captivated, drawn into the story she was telling through her playing. It was a moment of pure connection, where the audience felt what she felt, where the barriers between performer and listener seemed to dissolve. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that this was what she had always wanted, not just to play, but to touch the hearts of others. Among the crowd that night was a music critic from a local publication. He had heard whispers of her talent and wanted to experience it firsthand. By the end of her performance, he was visibly moved. Afterward, he approached her with a mixture of respect and curiosity, asking if she would consider performing at a small concert series he organized. The opportunity was unexpected and daunting, but she could feel her dreams beginning to unfold in ways she had never imagined. Over the next few weeks, she prepared for the concert series with careful attention. She selected pieces that not only showcased her technical skill, but also reflected her personal journey. She practiced late into the night, sometimes returning to the restaurant after her shift just to spend a few quiet moments at the piano. The hours were long and the work demanding, but the purpose behind it made every effort worthwhile. During this period, her work with the music program also took on new dimensions. She began mentoring a group of students more intensively, helping them develop not just their skill but their confidence and passion for music. She shared her own story openly, explaining how persistence and belief had helped her overcome challenges. The students responded eagerly, inspired not only by her talent but by the example of resilience she embodied. Teaching became as fulfilling as performing, and she discovered a joy in helping others discover their own potential. Back at the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Customers who had once treated her with indifference now approached with respect, sometimes even admiration. The staff watched her with pride, having witnessed her growth from a timid waitress to a confident performer and mentor. Even the regular wealthy guests who had once mocked her now listened quietly when she played, some leaving with a sense of amazement and newfound respect. The night of the first concert arrived. She entered the small venue with a mix of nerves and excitement. The room was modest, filled with attentive listeners who had come specifically to hear her music. She took her seat at the piano and began to play. The first notes were deliberate, careful, as if testing the waters, but soon they flowed naturally, confidently with the emotion she had cultivated over months of practice. Every melody told a story, every pause spoke volumes. The audience was captivated, experiencing her journey through the language of her music. After the performance, she received applause and heartfelt appreciation. The critic wrote a glowing review, praising not just her technical skill but the depth of feeling in her playing. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it reinforced her belief in her own abilities. She had turned a moment of public humiliation into a powerful platform, and now others could witness the talent she had always carried within herself. The success of the concert series opened doors to further opportunities. She was invited to participate in community events, perform at small music festivals, and collaborate with other musicians. Each new opportunity was a step further away from the timid waitress she had once been, a step toward the musician she had always dreamed of becoming. The journey was still ongoing, but she embraced each challenge with determination and humility. Amid these successes, she remained deeply connected to the restaurant and the music program. They were the foundations of her journey, the places where her talent had first been recognized and nurtured. She continued to perform there, not out of necessity but out of gratitude and a desire to give back. The staff and regulars had become witnesses to her transformation, and her presence at the piano was now a source of pride for them all. She also took time to reflect on her personal growth. The years of struggle, the moments of doubt, and the experiences of being overlooked and underestimated had shaped her into a resilient and empathetic individual. She had learned to balance humility with confidence, to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength, and to recognize the power of perseverance. These lessons extended beyond music, influencing how she approached life, relationships, and challenges. One day, while practicing for an upcoming performance, she received a message from a former student who had struggled greatly at first, but had now mastered several pieces. The student expressed gratitude for her guidance, explaining how her encouragement and example had inspired them to continue pursuing their own dreams. The message brought tears to her eyes, reminding her that her journey was not only about personal achievement, but also about making a meaningful impact on the lives of others. As she continued to grow and perform, she found herself dreaming bigger than ever before. The idea of recording her own music, organizing larger concerts, and reaching even wider audiences became increasingly tangible. The once unthinkable possibilities now seemed within reach, and each step she took built momentum toward realizing her full potential. She embraced the unknown with courage, trusting in the skills, experiences, and resilience she had developed. Through all these experiences, the piano remained a constant companion. It was more than an instrument. It was a mirror of her journey, reflecting her triumphs, challenges, and growth. Every performance, every practice session, and every shared melody reinforced her connection to music and to herself. She had transformed from a young waitress forced to play in humiliation into a musician whose talent and heart could inspire, connect, and heal. The journey was far from over, but the young woman had reached a turning point. She had discovered that resilience, dedication, and courage could turn even the most difficult circumstances into opportunities. She had learned that her voice, her talent, and her passion were valuable not just to herself, but to the people she touched with her music. And she had realized that the path she had taken, with all its challenges and triumphs, had led her to a place of fulfillment, purpose, and hope for the future. With each new day, she continued to refine her skills, explore her creativity, and share her music with others. Her performances became more expressive, her teaching more impactful, and her confidence more grounded. She had found balance between her responsibilities and her passion, and the harmony between the two brought a deep sense of satisfaction. The restaurant, the music program, and the concert stages were all part of a journey that had transformed her life. And so she continued to play, teach, and inspire. Her hands moved over the piano keys with grace and confidence, her heart poured into each melody, and her spirit embraced the possibilities that lay ahead. The young woman who had once been forced to perform in shame had become someone who played with freedom, purpose, and authenticity. Her music was no longer just a skill. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of following one's dreams. The final part of her journey began on a day that seemed ordinary at first. She walked into the restaurant, her step steady and confident, the memory of her early days there feeling distant yet poignant. The piano sat in its corner, gleaming under the soft lights, a silent witness to every triumph, doubt, and discovery. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar warmth, the sense of home, and the echo of the woman she had become. Her life had changed in so many ways. She was no longer just a waitress, quietly navigating a world that had once overlooked her. She was a musician, a teacher, a performer, and a mentor. Her music had reached people beyond the walls of the restaurant, touching hearts and inspiring others. She had learned that talent combined with courage and resilience could open doors once thought closed, and that sharing her gift could be as powerful as the gift itself. The community music program had flourished under her guidance. Students who once struggled with fear and self-doubt now played with confidence and joy. She encouraged them to find their own voice in music, teaching them not just technique but the importance of emotion, perseverance, and authenticity. Watching them grow reminded her of her own journey, the long road from shame to empowerment, and the power of music to transform lives. One evening, she received an invitation from a local music festival. They had heard about her performances and wanted her to play as part of a special showcase for emerging talent. She felt a surge of excitement mixed with nerves. Performing on a larger stage with a new audience was a challenge, but it also represented the culmination of everything she had worked toward. It was a chance to step fully into the world she had dreamed of, the world that had once seemed so distant. In preparation, she devoted herself to practice and reflection. She selected pieces that were technically demanding and emotionally rich, ones that told stories of her journey. Each session was a reminder of how far she had come, of the nights she had spent hiding behind her music, and the first night she had been forced to perform in shame. Those memories, once painful, now fueled her determination to succeed and to honor the path she had traveled. The festival day arrived, and she felt a mixture of anticipation and calm. The venue was filled with an audience eager to experience the music of emerging artists. As she approached the piano, she closed her eyes briefly, letting the memories of her journey flow through her. When her fingers touched the keys, the room seemed to hold its breath. Each note was deliberate, each melody alive with the story of her life, the struggles, the victories, and the resilience that had brought her to this stage. As she played, she felt a connection with the audience unlike any she had experienced before. They were listening, truly listening, not just to the notes but to the emotion behind them. The music became a bridge, connecting hearts and minds, carrying the story of a young woman who had refused to let shame define her. The applause at the end of her performance was thunderous, but what mattered most was the sense of shared experience, the realization that her music had reached others in a deep and meaningful way. After the festival, she received offers to perform at other events, both local and regional. Each opportunity was carefully considered, and she continued to balance her work at the restaurant with her growing musical career. She maintained her connection to the place that had witnessed her transformation, understanding that it had been the crucible in which her resilience and talent had been forged. Her teaching continued to be a central part of her life. She nurtured the students in her program, encouraging them to embrace challenges and pursue their passions with determination. She shared her story openly, not to boast but to show that even in moments of fear or humiliation, there is potential for growth and discovery. Her students were inspired not just by her music, but by the example of her perseverance and courage. Over time, she began to compose her own music, blending classical influences with her own personal experiences and emotions. Her compositions reflected the depth of her journey, the highs and lows, the moments of doubt, and the triumphs of persistence. Each piece was a personal statement, a reflection of the woman she had become, and a gift to those who listened. Performing her own compositions brought a new sense of fulfillment, a deep connection between creator and audience. The restaurant remained a touchstone in her life. She continued to perform there occasionally, not out of obligation, but as a gesture of gratitude and recognition of the place where her talent had been discovered and nurtured. The staff and regular patrons treated her with warmth and admiration, a stark contrast to the days when she had felt invisible and dismissed. The piano that had once been a symbol of fear and shame had become a symbol of resilience, growth, and achievement. Her personal life blossomed alongside her musical endeavors. She developed friendships with fellow musicians, teachers, and students, forming a supportive community that celebrated growth, creativity, and collaboration. The connections she built reinforced the importance of sharing talent and supporting one another on the path of personal and professional development. Throughout it all, she never lost sight of the journey that had brought her to this point. She reflected on the night she had been forced to play, the humiliation she had felt, and the courage it had taken to continue. That moment, painful as it was, had ignited a spark that eventually became a flame, leading her to a life filled with purpose, music, and connection. She understood that even the hardest moments could contain the seeds of transformation, if only one had the courage to embrace them. As her musical career grew, she continued to inspire others through both performance and teaching. Her story became known not just for the talent she displayed, but for the resilience, courage, and dedication that had shaped her path. People who had once doubted her ability or overlooked her presence were now witnesses to a remarkable transformation, one that illustrated the power of persistence and belief in oneself. One quiet evening, after a full day of teaching and performing, she returned to the restaurant. The lights were soft, the piano waiting in its familiar corner. She sat down and played, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for herself. The music flowed freely, reflecting the journey she had traveled, the lessons she had learned, and the person she had become. Each note was a celebration of her resilience, a reminder of the strength within her, and a testament to the power of following one's passion. In that moment, she realized that the journey was never truly about the applause, the recognition, or even the opportunities. It was about the courage to continue, the dedication to nurture talent, and the willingness to embrace both triumphs and setbacks. It was about discovering the depth of her own potential and sharing it with the world in a way that touched hearts and inspired others. The young woman who had once been forced to perform in shame had become a symbol of hope and resilience. Her music spoke of transformation, perseverance, and the enduring power of passion. She had reclaimed her voice, her dreams, and her life, proving that even the most difficult circumstances could lead to extraordinary growth. And as she played her final notes that night, she knew that the journey would continue, each day offering new opportunities to learn, create, and inspire through the universal language of music.